Hi, this is Estelle Erasmus, your host for Freelance Writing Direct. In this short, soundbite-filled podcast, I'll cover everything the freelance and creative writer and author needs to do to move forward with their writing, their creativity, and their career. Through conversations with guests, we'll cover tips, tricks, and actionable strategies. So join me every week and grow your business and build your craft with Freelance Writing Direct. And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes and Spotify. Hi, everybody. It's Estelle Erasmus, and I'm so thrilled to announce that my book, Writing That Gets Noticed, Find Your Voice, Become a Better Storyteller, Get Published, is out and available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, IndieBound, and wherever books are sold. So I would love it if you'd pick up a copy, and I think you'll learn a lot. Thanks. Bye-bye. Hi, everyone. This is Estelle Erasmus, and I am so happy to have William Dameron, Bill, as my guest in this episode titled The Way Life and Writing Should Be with Bill Dameron. Here is a bit about Bill. Essayist and memoirist Bill Dameron is the author of the New York Times Editor's Choice, The Lie, a memoir of 2 marriages, catfishing, and coming out. His work has appeared in the New York Times, the Times UK, the Telegraph, Oprah Magazine, the Boston Globe, Salon, the Huffington Post, the Washington Post, and in the book, Fashionably Late, Gay, Bi, and Trans Men Who Came Out Later in Life. His debut novel, The Way Life Should Be, and I'm so happy to have you with me today, Bill.
Thank you. It's great to be here, Estelle. You know, I'm a huge fan of yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much. You wrote such a beautiful blurb for my book, Writing That Gets Noticed. So I so appreciate it. And you're in the book. So as your modern love essay, which I analyzed and gave all the insight on your choices and why it works so well and how writers can learn from you. So thank you again.
Thank you.
So let's get right into the way that I titled this episode, because it's The Way Life Should Be, which is your book, your novel. And it's interesting because your first book, The Lie, was a memoir, and it was very successful. It did very well. You had a modern love that was the precursor to it. And then you decided to go into writing a novel. Can you tell me a little bit about why you made that choice to switch genres? And I know you have an interesting story of the original iteration of the book. So if you can share that, that'd be great.
Yeah, so I started with nonfiction because for most of my life, I lied. That's the name of the memoir. I was in the closet until I was 43. I came out at 43, married my husband at 47, published my memoir at 55, and my novel published at 60. So I'm a late bloomer. So it was really important for me to tell the truth to begin with. That's why I started with memoir. I wanted to write about, initially, I began writing about my life with Paul and all of the things that I couldn't seem to find, you know, about how wonderful life could be when you become authentic and come out. And so I got that memoir out there. I published the Modern Love essay first, which is a chapter from my memoir, and I thought it was the best of my writing. So I pulled it out of the memoir, sent it to Dan Jones. It was published, heard from an agent within a half hour, and then I was able to publish my memoir. So that was fantastic. So then once I got the truth out, I realized, oh, now I can write fiction. I've told my truth. And so I wanted my next book to be a novel. But I kind of didn't get there in such a linear fashion. during the pandemic, I tried to write, but like a lot of writers, I was stifled. I just couldn't write anything. Nothing was coming to me. I was at home, working from home. My office was in my home. Everybody was there. And I had written something. I sent it to my agent. He was like, "Okay, great college try. Let's have a call." So I talked to him and I told him everything that was going on with my life. It was more like a therapy session. And he's like, "Well, that's really interesting. I think right now you need to just be a reporter, record everything that's going on." So out of that, my life in Maine, being stuck in the pandemic, was born this next book, which is a novel. I took basic premise of two men who find themselves in Maine, embarking on the second part of their lives together, and then threw in their nearly adult children who are going through crises of their own.
And so is it somewhat based on parts of your life or parts of your family?
I think if my family were to read it, they would find traits and things, maybe some situations like taking care of aging parents, that makes its way into the book. So some of those premises are there because, number one, they just resonate so much for me, and I'm aware of what it's like to do that, but also it's going to resonate for readers as well. So there will be things that are similar to my life.
That makes so much sense. My next one I've been thinking about, I'd had a memoir and then I'm thinking of novelizing it. And what I realize is when you take aspects of your life and you put them into a novel, there's a certain freedom that comes with that. Can you, and I know you've been feeling some of that, can you talk about that a little bit so that it can resonate with the listeners?
Yeah, it was really interesting to publish a memoir first because you have to dig really deep and expose all your flaws. And honestly, I was terrified when I went on tour and was talking about these really personal things that went on. Not only that, but my publisher's attorney, I had to have 2 legal calls to go through. Okay, did this really happen? And there was a room full of people, and I had to say, yeah. So that was tough. When you write fiction, in a way, you know what? It's almost like telling more of a truth because you're free. You're free of the fears of revealing really personal stuff. You can really go there in fiction and take an event even further because it kind of falls under that scrim of, this is fiction. So this tour and this book will be a different experience for me. I'll get to go out and say, this sprung from my imagination. Yeah, some of these things bear a resemblance to my life, but I'm distilling them into what's really important, and I'm making up events that are like real life.
That is a really great and concise way of putting it, to show that it is such a different genre and such a different form. Do you follow the same process for writing fiction as you do for writing nonfiction? And what is your process of writing?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because so many people think with memoir, you just write your story as it happened. It began here, it ends here. It's not like that. You're looking through a certain lens, and you've got to pick the beginning and the end date. It's not when I was born and when I died. So you're looking at your life through a certain lens, and it's got to have a plot. And like any great essay, it's got to have the story, the external story, and the internal story, the one that's happening on top and the one that's going beneath the plot and the story and the situation. So
Vivian Gornick. That's
yes,
yeah, her
exactly.
book.
And I knew that in my essays and was kind of intuitive, but when I got to my book, I thought, oh, I'm just going to write it as it happened. And my agent, Christopher, actually helped me a lot. He said, we need to talk about plot. You know what happened, but the reader's not going to know. And so you don't have to reveal everything at once. And
So are you talking
that's,
about like backstory? So you were more inclined to share the backstory, the ruminations, and then you had to pull back for fiction with
yes.
that.
Yeah, yeah. And I had to, put in a certain amount of surprise. It's not about just putting everything on the page. It's also about what you don't put on the page, because you don't need to put everything. You need to put the things that are relative to the central question, which is what happens in my case, what happens when a man is in the closet and what happens when he comes out. If it ties to that central question or MDQ, main dramatic question, then you can put it in the book. So I approach the novel the same way. What's the central question? And I also do the same thing by first writing a summary of what I'm gonna, 2 or 3 pages, and then I do chapter summaries. I do an outline. I'm not a, there's outliners
And
and then there's
pantser, plotters
pantsers.
and plotters.
I'm not a pantser because that would take me forever. I actually sold my novel before it was written, and I'm glad I did that in one way, because it forced me, I had an end date where I had to be done, and that meant I had to create the outline in order to write the book in, it was 5 months. So it was a quick write. I wouldn't have been able to do that without the deadline, but it taught me I could do it.
This is fascinating to me because I have to say, I think I'm a pantser. I don't work with an outline. I kind of work and then I create the outline after. Isn't that interesting? And maybe I could learn
It's
more
whatever
from
works
you.
for you, though. It's whatever works for you. For me, I know too that I write chapter summaries. I know as I go along, my
Yeah.
story is going to change. But at least for me, one other really important thing for each main character, I write down who they are at the beginning and who they're going to be at the end. Because if you don't know where they're going, it's really tough to get there. So they have something that they want, and there is roadblock, roadblock, roadblock. So your main character wants something. They have a flaw. They don't know what the flaw is. And there's going to be roadblocks that prevent them from getting what they want. And so those are the things that I pick up in my characters, who they are, what do they want, what's their flaw, and how do they overcome that? And then that is the premise of every book, just to distill it down. If there's not conflict, you don't have a book.
So writing The Lie changed your life in so many ways because you admitted what had happened. You talked about your picture being used to catfish people all over the States, I guess all over the world, so to speak. And how did it change your life? I mean, obviously you became a published author, you got even more acclaim than before. So what really made an impact?
I think what really made an impact, all of that was really incredibly interesting. And I did publish an essay about it in Salon, and the Times UK wrote an article that said the William Dameron, the man everybody wants to date. So that was fun and exciting, but how it really changed my life was I received so many letters from men and women who said, "You saved my life." That to me was the biggest. Even if I got one email that said that, that's all that matters. So it wasn't, it made me realize the power of words and the power of our stories. And it's not necessarily how they change our lives, but how they change other people's lives around us, and people we don't know and people we may never hear from, but knowing that it might be a lifeline for somebody was the biggest impact on my life.
I have to ask you, did you, before you wrote the book or before it was published, did you share it with your kids?
Yeah, that's a good point. I did. And I will tell you, I did not share it with anyone except for my editor, agent, and publisher until it got through all of the edits, until it got through the big developmental edits, because I didn't want to even think about anybody looking over my shoulder at it, because when you do that, you're going to change the way you write. So you have to pretend that nobody's ever going to read it. And that's what I did. I literally closed the door to the room I was in. And I put things down that I thought I couldn't say. And that's another important thing. Write what you think you can't say, because when you get it on the page, it's a lot less scarier than it is. And you get power over that truth. So once it went through the developmental edits, there was another really important thing, because my editor helped me see other people in my book in a different light, to show them complete compassion. Why are they acting this way? You know what? Your mother didn't put you in the closet because she hated you. She did it because she was protecting you. And once I knew that and got all of that story on the page, then my kids, my mother, my husband, they could all see their true selves on the page. And it wasn't the things that they did that they might have said something about. They would have said, well, I didn't have long hair then. Why did you give me long hair? You know, it was little stuff like that. It wasn't the big stuff that I was afraid of.
And I have to say, working with a lot of beginner writers, they will often paint themselves as the complete victim, and everybody else is the monster. Everybody else has the flaws. And I tell them, one of my Estelle's Edge is, I say to them, you have to appear to be somebody that the reader can relate to. You have to have your own flaws, because nobody is infallible. Nobody never makes a mistake. Nobody just looks at themselves as an angel. And I've had people write, you know, I'm the angel and they're the devil. Well, no, that's not real life. So the fact that your editor, your agent, was so helpful with you in that, it showed that they really understand what makes a book resonate for a reader.
Writing is expressing vulnerability on the page. You have to do that.
I agree. So you know, people always say, oh, you're an overnight success, right? Not for you, but, you know, somebody will have success. They'll be like, where did they come from? You have been working. You are a working essayist. You have been in the New York Times, the Washington Post, Boston Globe's Connections, Huffington Post, Personal. I mean, all the big places you've been in, and that's even before your book. So you know how to write. What are some of your actionable tips for writers on how to best tell their stories, whether they're using devices or tips and tricks that you know that you can now share with our listeners?
Yeah, that's a great point. And not only was I not overnight, I was very late in writing, because
well, I always say you bloom, but you bloom big. I bloom late too, and I bloom big. So yeah.
I started off with a personal blog, you know, when blogging was popular in the early 2000s. And the first thing that I did was imitated other writers. I imitated those writers I loved. I loved Augustine Burroughs. I loved David Sedaris, Joanne Beard. You know, I read all those essays and I tried to figure out what made them work. And the way to do that is to begin with imitation first. And then you're not going to get it right, and you're going to sound like them or like a bad representation of them, which is even worse. But eventually, with enough practice, and you have to practice, you have to write, you have to read. Reading is so important in terms of writing. And I work as an IT director too, so I have to get up early in the morning to do it. And sometimes you just have to you have to show up, first of all, and do it every day, every morning, whenever. Eventually, you'll get more confidence. In terms of concrete tools, what really helped me is pretty much distilled in one podcast. And you and I both know her really well, Ann Hood, because we both studied with her.
Yes.
She's the most amazing writer. She's had 4 modern love essays.
She's
the
amazing.
most published modern love essayist. And she did this podcast called 10 Steps to Write a Kick-Ass Essay. And it's a part of 10 House podcast. And she lists 10 steps. And they are the 10 steps that I eventually learned, but it took me years and years of imitating and reading essays and trying to discover what made them tick. But there is one I use over and over again, and it's the objective correlative. And the objective correlative is an object or an event that carries the weight of emotion in an essay. And I find myself using it over and over and over again. One example is in my modern love essay, after 264 haircuts, a marriage ends. And a little clue, if you're trying to figure out what an objective correlative is, it's usually in the title. So it was a haircut. My objective correlative was a haircut, which is what my ex-wife, she would cut my hair. She cut it for 22 years. And that represented all those years and all of our rituals as a couple. It stood in for our love and our marriage. And I used that haircut and a final haircut. As she's cutting away the layers, I'm revealing the secrets. So you can't really see what an emotion is. I don't know what love looks like, but I can show you in a haircut what it looks like. And so it goes to show, don't tell. And so I think an objective correlative is just so important. One other thing always important to remember is, as I said before, the story, the internal story and the external story, and those two are happening at the same time. And if you don't have one, it's going to fall flat. You need to have that conflict.
Tell me more about that, the conflict aspect.
So there's, it kind of goes back to when I outline a character, there is a flaw that the person has that is keeping them from getting what they want. And that's sort of the internal story. The things, the roadblocks that keep happening is the plot, the external story. So you've got this person who needs to change in some way to get what they want, but they're not going to get there until they get over all these roadblocks. And that's going to change who they are inside. And so there's going to become a realization at the end that the narrator has changed in some way. And that's when the two stories collide, that you're going to get the resolution.
And that's not just in a book, but that's in a personal essay. That's in an
that's in a personal essay and a book. Yeah,
and a book.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. And so you've written short as well, right? Because for the Boston Globe Connections, it has to be, I think, 600 words.
Yeah.
How do you distill the internal and the external with the implications in 600 words? What was that challenge like?
And you know what really helps there again is the same thing, an objective correlative, because I could say this happened to me. I was I didn't like the way I was and I wanted to be somebody else. And I was in the closet. And that's going to take a lot of words to say all that. So instead, I used not really an object, but something else, a walk. I noticed the way that my daughter, who was 14 at the time, had grown into her adult walk. And I knew, oh, that's the way she's going to be. That's what she's going to carry through the rest of her life. And so I talk about the way I walked and the way I didn't like the way I walked, because a girl made fun of me when I was a kid, said, I wish I had a porch swing like that. So it was like, I walked like a girl. And so I modified my walk, and I weave in that I got married. And then when I met my husband, he filmed me on our honeymoon where I was walking through a hotel in Miami, and I realized, oh, look, I actually don't mind the way I walk. So in a way, I used that walk of finally settling into my adult walk and really condensed the story into 600 words by using that objective correlative. So each word had more, it had double its power.
So can you do that with anything? Like if I said to you, I'm not challenging that, but if I said like, write a story about your favorite tie, you would then want to imbue it with emotion, right? If you're working with it as an objective correlative. So what would you give me an example just off the top of your head, how you would machinate that or work that?
Specifically a tie?
Why not?
Yeah. So I can, even off the top of my head, I think about all the years that I had to wear a tie at work. And I worked first in banking, which was a very conservative environment. So I would relate that tie to being in banking and not really loving what I did. And even when I moved into IT, I had to wear a tie. And like, you're having to do stuff like under a desk and this tie is getting in the way. And I remember having to shred some discs and the tie got caught in the shredder and it could have choked me. So that tie was almost like fatal. So a tie can become so much more than a tie. It was a way that it tied me down to work. It probably tied me down to the marriage I was in. And it almost killed me. And
this is amazing.
However, I will wear a bow tie because I think bow ties have so much more character.
Okay, so would you end it? Let's just say this hypothetical tie essay. Would you end with your transformation would be now you wear a bow tie because you're not conservative. You're not doing what you did.
And I wear it for me, for nobody else.
You wear it for you, and the tie. Yeah.
Well, I wouldn't say it's easy, but if you give it thought, you really have to dig. And on your first go around, when you write an essay, you're not going to have all that.
No.
But it's going to, because you have to dig so deep to come up with what's keeping you up. This
was such a great exercise in how your mind works and how you can go deep that way. And I think not everyone obviously is going to be able to do this, but it's fascinating seeing the deconstruction of how something like that would evolve, and also writing short and how objective correlative works. This has been such a fascinating discussion. Can you tell us what is next for you and where people can find you? And in the show notes, I will give the link to your book.
The Way Life Should Be is the state motto of Maine. And it's a beautiful cover. I love the book. And I'm working on my third novel, but that's the subject for another podcast.
I love that. I mean, they say that when you have a book that you're done with, start working on something else. Oh my gosh.
You can find me, at williamdameron.com. And then on social media, my user handle is WC Dameron on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook is Bill Dameron.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Bill. I could talk with you all day long, but this was so great. It was so great having you on the show. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Estelle. I loved it.
Take care. Thanks again, Bill. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Follow me at EstelleSErasmus.com on my website and on social media, which is Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter at Estelle S. Erasmus. And we're now on YouTube for Freelance Writing Direct. Follow along, and soon everyone will be reading what you're writing.